Welcome to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name's Jared Mello, and I'm the Shepherd of Black Sheep. Today, I've got another Dr. K video to break down. He's given me a never-ending supply of content here because he talks about a lot of similar things that I talk about. But then even better, I tend to disagree with some of the things that he says. And yes, he is a Harvard psychiatrist. He does help people. I don't disagree with everything he says. But he does seem to he has this tone about him where it seems like if you didn't know any better, you would just think he's correct. And with any professional, I think you should be hesitant doing that. You should always do your due diligence and fact check. Fact check, cross examine them, see if how they hold up against other people in similar fields. Don't take what anyone says as gospel. But in this video, what he does is he breaks down BPD, borderline personality disorder, and he talks about their prognosis and how to have a healthy relationship with one. And right off the bat, I'm a little bit skeptical of that, but we'll break it down. We'll break it down here and we'll see how it goes. But we'll wait for some people to come in here too. Welcome, everyone. Because like I said, there's some things that I agree with, and there's some things that I think could be a little problematic depending on where you are in life. All right, here we go.
Today, we're going to talk about how to successfully have a relationship with someone with borderline personality disorder. So this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. There's a lot of resources out there for people with borderline personality disorder. There are also places like support groups for people who are dating people or in relationships with people with borderline personality disorder. But I've worked with a lot of people with BPD, and I've worked with a lot of people who've dated people with BPD. And the truth of the matter is that oftentimes BPD is viewed as a red flag. And what a lot of people will get in terms of advice is that, hey, like your family and friends will tell you if someone has BPD, like you should break up with them, right?
Now, would I tell someone to instantly break up with someone just because they have BPD? No, not just because they have BPD. The more important thing would be, how are they acting in the relationship? How are they behaving in the relationship? That is way more important than what their label is. Behaviors over labels always. Ellie, how are you? We're going to break down this Dr. K video on BPD here.
Because the relationship is such a roller coaster and there are so many red flags and they're so emotionally manipulative and you're not sure what's going on. You're dating this person, they're getting better and everything seems fine. And then you wake up tomorrow and it's like you're back to square one. It can be incredibly like a wild ride, which can be emotionally exhausting. And so the sad truth is that a lot of people will sort of like end up avoiding people with BPD. And it sort of makes sense because that can be a very challenging relationship to have. And this isn't really enhanced by like media depictions of BPD. So if you look at, how the media and TV shows and movies will kind of portray people with BPD, it's usually the crazy ex-girlfriend. And a lot of people out there will sort of like, they'll have a crazy ex-girlfriend who was was one hell of a roller coaster of a relationship. And so this is, I think, really important because people with BPD actually do get better. They can form very, very wonderful, healthy relationships. I've seen that happen over and over again. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes we fall in love with someone who has a diagnosable mental illness. And I don't think that it's good to just discard that person because they have a mental illness.
Now, a big point here. It's up to the person that has BPD to do something about it. It's not up to the people around them. It is up to the person that has BPD to do something about their issue. When they do something about their issue, maybe they go to DBT, then they're less likely to act out on their symptoms of the disorder. That's the bottom line. Don't let anyone put the responsibility on other people. The responsibility is on the person with the disorder.
And sometimes having a mental illness can be really hard on your partner as well as on yourself. So, what I'd love to do today is talk y'all through a couple of things. The first is help y'all understand some of the basics of BPD. The second is help you understand how some of the core features of borderline personality disorder can manifest within a relationship. And the third is some principles that I've seen have sort of led to more successful relationships with people with BPD. So let's kind of start with some basic facts. So the first thing to understand about dating someone with BPD is chances are they will get better. So the research suggests that 35% of people with BPD will actually be in remission at 1 year. So that means that BPD kind of goes away after 1 year for about 35% of people. But what about like higher odds? So if you look at people with BPD 10 years out, 91% of them are in remission.
So this is a really disingenuous framing by Dr. K here. If you look at the study that he's pulling this from, I screenshotted it. He intentionally left this part out. So what it specifically says is the 10-year course of BPD is characterized by high rates of remission, low rates of relapse, and severe and persistent impairment in social functioning. Severe and persistent impairment in social functioning. A pretty big thing to leave out, if you ask me. These results inform expectations of patients, families, and clinicians and document the severe public health burden of the disorder. Can you imagine leaving that part out, the severe dysfunction? Like, good grief.
And they actually hit a 99% remission rate at about 16 years. So what that means is that a lot of people will think that if someone is a crazy ex-girlfriend, if they stay with that person will remain crazy for the rest of their lives. And this is what you have to put up with for the rest of your life. But the truth of the matter is that for the majority of people, BPD actually resolves. And the way he's framing this, I don't like. For the majority of people that maybe do the work, that go to therapy, that go to DBT, do the 5 steps of change I always talk about, have the humility to admit they have a problem, be honest about what that problem really is, have the willingness to change, put in the footwork to change, and then have the resilience to keep going when it gets tough. If you do those 5 things, yeah, especially with BPD, I think it's possible. But without any footwork and with a bad attitude, it's just not going to go away on its own. Like, I would not expect that. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And again, if I totally get what he means when he says we don't choose to fall in love with people that have mental illnesses or personality disorders. But could you imagine telling someone this, oh, you fell in love with a narcissist, so you don't want to just give up on them because they're a narcissist? I'd be really skeptical of someone who said something like that. And granted, borderline, they can be victimized, but they can also be victimizers. People don't like talking about the victimizer side, the abusive side, but that can happen too. Now, is every borderline abusive? No, I don't think every borderline is abusive. I think many of them can also be victims, but some of them definitely are abusive, and that can't be neglected either. Way that it resolves is by having oftentimes a stable relationship. And so the reason these people get stuck is because there's kind of too much to handle, too much of a roller coaster. They get dumped. And then like the whole cycle kind of repeats itself. They feel more insecure. We'll kind of get to that. But the first thing that I want to tell you is that if you're in a relationship with someone with BPD or you have BPD, that the good news is that actually 99% of people are actually okay after about 16 years. And 35% of people are better after 1 year. So it kind of, paces out that way. So the second thing that we have.
And the big caveat is he says better, but according to that study he got that from, they still have severe impairment in social functioning. You can't neglect that side of it either. So again, intentionally, I think he left that part out, but it's a pretty big thing to leave out, if you ask me.
Have to talk a little bit about is the gender breakdown in BPD. So about 75% of people who have BPD are women. And this is part of the reason why I think they're characterized this way in movies and like TV shows and stuff. Our media portrayals are usually focused on women. And there's like some amount of like truth to that, right? Because the majority of people who have BPD happen to be women.
Because what they used to think was borderline is the female disorder, narcissism is the male disorder. They are learning it is closer to equal for both. Not exactly equal, but I think in terms of a narcissistic operating system and a borderline operating system, it can be closer to 50-50. I don't think it's probably exact. And the diagnosed narcissists are more men, and the diagnosed borderlines are more women. But diagnosed isn't really, to me, what you should be looking for. The narcissistic operating system is what you should be looking for. A borderline operating system is what you should be looking for. That's really what matters. A lot of people that have these conditions, they're not diagnosed.
Some recent research is suggesting that the ratio is actually closer to 1-to-1 or 50%. And today, what we're going to talk about is some of the examples that I'll use will be sort of focused on a woman with BPD, because that's most of the experience that I've dealt with. But there are absolutely cases, and we'll touch on these as well, where men can have BPD too, and those can be really challenging relationships. Okay. So don't give up hope. You don't have to dump them. We're not saying that you shouldn't dump them if that relationship isn't right for you. But I want to tell y'all first and foremost that having BPD, even though it can be a red flag, does not mean that it is an insurmountable problem in a relationship. So
Now, the big thing is this: you can't help anyone that doesn't want to help themselves, regardless of what it is. If you want it more than the person that has the personality disorder, I would tell you, stop dreaming. You can't do anything in that position. But if the person who has an issue, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar, addiction, fill in the blank with what it is, they have to want it. Because you can't change them. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you want to try to help them, your love will not cure their addiction. Your love will not cure their personality disorder. What is required is for them to want to get better themselves. You can't give someone the willingness to change. Remember that.
Move on to understanding a couple of the core features of BPD. The first thing to understand about BPD is that these people have difficulty with emotional regulation. So if you look at the brains of people with BPD, they actually suffer more than the average human being.
I could see that. That definitely makes sense to me.
And how can you say that, Dr. K? Like, oh my God, like, isn't all suffering equal? How can we compare suffering? Like, everyone is entitled to suffer. Yes, that's true. Everyone is entitled to suffering. We shouldn't compare suffering, but you can actually do brain scans on people with BPD. You can actually study their reactions in their brain, and what you discover is something that's really interesting. So the amount of time that it takes the average person to feel a negative emotion is like, let's say, somewhere between 5 and 30 seconds. People with BPD feel negative emotions more rapidly than people with normal brains. They feel those emotions more intensely. So they feel worse faster. The measurable blood flow to the negative circuits of their brain is actually increased. So they literally feel that emotion more intensely than average. And this is the actually most damaging thing in my clinical experience, is the amount of time, the duration of that negative emotional experience is way longer than average. So whereas I may get really upset for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, like after about half an hour, I'll kind of cool down. Whereas if you look at some people with BPD, it will ruin their entire day, or that negative emotional experience can last for like 24 hours. So
this is true. That does absolutely happen. And that's where their coping mechanisms will come into play.
Something that's really important to understand, because there's going to be a high amount of emotional activity in their brains. The second thing to understand about BPD is that the way that they feel about themselves is highly tied to the way that they are treated. So if you look at the core problem of BPD, in my opinion, this is kind of my take as a psychiatrist, it is a sense of self that is not well developed. So what does this kind of mean? This means that, let's say that I have like an opinion of myself, right? I believe, hey, my name is Al.
And before he goes on, it is an underdeveloped sense of self. Absolutely. Like they have an unstable sense of identity. A lot of people, they'll pretend to be people they're not. They'll try on new identities and roles. That is a staple of BPD. Now, the aspect of this I didn't like with what he said is how they feel about themselves is how other people treat them. And I would say to an extent, there are certainly times when a borderline person might split and their reaction will be disproportionate than to what happened to them. You can't underestimate that side either. So, to an extent, this is true for anyone, right? If people are treating you badly, you're not going to feel good. Now, borderlines will take it more to as an extreme, but even in cases where it's not severe, it's just maybe someone messes up one small thing, a borderline can still split and they can go from turning someone into their favorite person to all black, where they kind of demonize that person and can't see them in a positive light anymore. The offense is very minor, and it doesn't even have to be consistently doing this one small thing. It can just happen once, and then poof, they have this distorted way of seeing it and they take it too far. So that's what I would say to what he just said.
Oh, look, I'm like kind of like a decent dude. I'm not perfect. I'm not terrible. And so as I move through the world, I will get feedback, right? So if someone like yells at me at a grocery store, I have this sense of self, which is different from the way that I'm treated. And so that provides me with resilience. If someone calls me a piece of crap, I'm not going to believe that because I have an internal sense of self. Similarly, if someone walks up to me and is like, hey, you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. You are the Messiah. You are beautiful. You are amazing. You are perfect. I'm actually not going to believe that either because I know, hey, like I'm flawed just like any other human being. So the way that what I think about myself is based on an internal sense of self-worth. And so depending on how I'm treated, I'll kind of like buffer against the way that people treat me. So if you look at when that sense of self-worth is not well developed, like teenagers are a really good example of this, right? So when you're a teenager, if everyone starts treating you like crap, you are going to feel like crap. And that's normal. That's part of the normal developmental process. So in the case of BPD, the core problem is that their sense of self isn't very well developed. So they're not as resilient to other people's changes. And so they become hypersensitive to the changes of other people. The third really,
And sometimes, and I think to an extent, regardless if someone has BPD or not, if enough people are treating you poorly, that is going to impact you, even if you're not borderline per se. And also keep this in mind too. Dr. Salerno and I, we have gone over this, but there's a fair genetic portion of BPD as well, right? These genes and the DNA, it absolutely matters. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that the environment is irrelevant. It does not mean that. It just means that there's a large portion of this that is genetic and biologically based. And it's also true for borderlines. Personality disorders in general, they think genes they account for 50%. But with personality disorders, people like Dr. Robert Plomin, they think it's even more than 50% it accounts for. So keep that in mind too.
really core feature to understand about BPD, people with BPD have a huge fear of abandonment. And there's a very, very tight correlation between childhood trauma and the development of BPD. And chances are the nature of that trauma somehow creates a fear of abandonment within the person with BPD.
And again, BPD people definitely have a fear of abandonment. That's the number one thing that you'll look out for, is that fear of abandonment. Also, the unstable sense of self, lots of impulsivity, mood swings, etc. Those are the staples of borderline. And they'll often be in love with the idea of love a lot of times. They'll have a favorite person, etc. Now, is it created by trauma? Now, people like Dr. Peter Salerno and Dr. Robert Plomin, they wouldn't think so. They don't think the environment is irrelevant, again, but they don't think it's caused from childhood trauma. More like chance environmental events is what Dr. Robert Plomin would say.
Okay. So now that we understand these three core things, difficulties with emotional regulation, a very not resilient sense of self, and a fear of abandonment, we'll start to see how these manifest in relationships. So if you look at the diagnostic criteria for BPD, like you literally look at like how we diagnose BPD, one of the core features of the diagnosis is a pattern of intense and unstable relationships. So why is this? So it kind of comes down to understanding this emotional regulation piece. If you look at a normal relationship, it'll be kind of like a bell curve in terms of emotional experiences. So most of the emotional experiences that you have with your partner will be like kind of mediocre, right? Like you're like cooking together, you're doing dishes, maybe you'll get into a little bit of a fight. you celebrate your birthday and it's like pretty fun and it's like pretty chill. It's like not that wild. It's like life is pretty normal with most people. The thing is, when you're dating someone with BPD, those relationships can be more U-shaped. So instead of most of the experiences being emotionally in the middle, they're actually emotionally at the extremes. And it feels like a real roller coaster because, you know, the experiences that you're having are like really, really wild. It's like, oh my God, on one day, like this relationship is intense and it's beautiful. It's amazing. Oh my God, we're like so in love. And it's like, so like, oh my God, this person is the one. We spent 72 hours together and we didn't spend a minute apart. And it was like, oh my God, it was like all the movies. And then when you leave on Monday morning and you don't answer a text, it's like, whoa, now we're suddenly swinging to the other end of the pendulum. What is wrong with you? Why don't you text me back? Like, I thought we had something real. I thought you were.
And that's a good example. And what will happen is one small thing, a text message doesn't get replied to right away, and they'll take it to an extreme. And they might split on you and they'll go from all good to all bad. That is exactly what can happen in a relationship with a borderline. And it's just like you said, unstable relationships that are also very intense. Definitely agree.
The one, I thought you meant it when you said you loved me. Like they'll say all kinds of like really nasty, emotionally manipulative, toxic stuff, right? And then you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And then y'all meet again. And then she starts crying and then you feel terrible and you're crying and then you guys hug and then like you're together again and like you're past it all and you really do love each other and love conquers all. And then, you know, you start to get an erection and then you have makeup sex and it's like, oh my God, we're back to the other end. That's what relationships with BPD can be like. It's one hell of a ride, right? With a very, very wild emotional swing. So why does this happen? It happens because of the difficulty with emotional regulation. So what people with BPD do is when they start to feel abandoned, right? Because you had these 3 days where y'all were joint at the hip and then you don't text someone back. What that person does is they start to feel abandoned. As they start to feel abandoned, remember, they start to suffer more than you do. So whereas like fear of abandonment may hurt you a little bit, like it's really intense for them and lasts for a whole day. And then what they start doing is they start engaging in behaviors to kind of bring you back. And so then they'll start texting you really toxic stuff, right? Or they'll bounce between like really toxic and like really sad things that like really pull at your heartstrings. They're like apologizing. I'm so sorry. I'm crying. Like, oh my God, like, will you ever forgive me? And it's like, then you feel like an asshole. They make you feel guilty. So you're like, yeah, of course I'll forgive you. It's okay. Right.
And that's a dangerous game to play, right? Where they say a lot of borderlines act in a way that abandonment becomes even more likely because of these games. Now, who doesn't leave? Well, people that have emotional dependency might not leave. People that don't know what they're dealing with might not leave. Narcissists who want to use them as a source of supply, they might keep them on the back burner. Narcissists and borderlines are a very notorious couple, by the way, that they can go back and forth, back and forth. The narcissist loves being idealized by them, and they're like, it's a good source of supply for them. And the borderline, often they're chasing the narcissist's love and approval. And again, the borderline might split occasionally, but ultimately that game can go round and round indefinitely.
And so it's like your emotions become this ping pong ball. And why do your emotions become a ping pong ball? Because their emotions are a ping pong ball and they're kind of getting bounced all over the place, which brings us to the second thing that's very common in BPD relationships, which is the feeling of mixed signals. Well, kind of like a pendulum, this kind of comes down to this fear of abandonment. So sometimes what happens when people have BPD is when they're engaged in a relationship, you know, what's going to happen is like things are going pretty well and y'all are having lots of fun, but in the back of their mind, they've been abandoned so much in the past, right? Because they got abandoned as kids. There's like that seat of trauma back there. And then they've had so many relationships which were so amazing. And how did those relationships always end up? The other person always ended up leaving, right? Because like they couldn't deal with the crazy. So they left. And so each time someone can't deal with the crazy, it traumatizes them further, increases the fear of abandonment. So now,
and so pause, he made another good point there too. A lot of healthy people that are in a good spot that practice radical self-respect, they're not going to put up with those games and they're going to walk away. Now, if you're a borderline person listening to this, because guess what? There are a lot of people who have borderline that know they do. Absolutely also true. And just know if that's your pattern, it just becomes your responsibility to try to do something about it. go to DBT. And I'm big into anything that can actually help. If prescription medications help, great. If supplements help, great. If DBT helps, great. If CBT helps, great. If EMDR or brain spotting or EFT helps, great. Sleep, diet, and exercise. I don't think that can hurt anybody. So I think all of these things can contribute, but as long as you're willing to do something and you actually try, that's a good step.
What they know, they're going to try to protect themselves and they're going to try to protect you. And the way that they're going to do that is when things are good, they're going to start to, when is the other shoe going to drop? When are things going to go back to the way that they always end up? Because remember, it happens 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times.
And then a borderline will also self-sabotage. So they're in that, they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm always abandoned. And then they do something to like provoke an abandonment. Sometimes it can seem like, and sometimes they'll say to themselves, well, I'll do this just to see how much they really care. I'll try to push them away to see if they will really leave. And if they don't, it means they really love me. But in a lot of borderline relationships, push, pull. If you go away, they want you to come back. If you get too close, they have a fear of being engulfed and smothered, and then they'll push you away. You'll see a lot of that pattern in these relationships.
It's got to happen 11th time, right? So then what they'll start to do is they'll start to push you away. And they'll start to test you, right? They'll start to say things that will feel a little bit weird. It'll feel really emotionally manipulative. And all this emotional manipulation, by the way, is pretty unconscious. So that's like something you got to give them a pass for if you can. So they'll start to like do things like, oh yeah, I know that this week has really been fantastic. And I know that we're deeply in love, but I know it won't last. They'll say something like that. And you'll be like, no, baby. Like, of course it'll last. Like, no, don't think that. Like, I'll be here for you forever. And they'll say, no.
And that's a manipulative thing for the borderline to say. That's kind of like a way to push you away a little bit. Oh, this is not going to last. And someone who's insecurely attached or has an anxious attachment style, they're going to want to chase the approval of the borderline that does that. Oh, no, we're going to be okay. I promise. I'm never going to leave you. And again, that's part of the manipulative game there.
Oh, you won't. You're just saying that today, but tomorrow it'll change, right? No relationships last forever. And you're like, no, baby, no. And so then you reassure them. So let's think about what's happening in that moment. Remember that they have difficulty regulating their own emotions. So what they rely on is you to regulate their emotions. So you become the mechanism of their emotional equilibrium. So if I'm feeling abandoned, I'm going to be a little bit pathetic. You won't love me forever.
And this is something that happens. It's the difference between how a narcissist triangulates and a borderline triangulates. A borderline, what they may do is they will try to triangulate you with somebody else in an immature way to get more love from you. Like they don't feel loved by you. So they'll try to triangulate you with somebody else to make you jealous so that you'll try harder to be with them and love them more. Narcissists triangulate simply to make you jealous. It's not because they want you to love them more. They often will do it because they enjoy making you feel uncomfortable. They get a little sadistic sense of glee about it. And they also think if you're jealous, it makes them feel more powerful. It gives them more admiration and it makes them feel more superior. But that's the difference between how borderlines may triangulate and the reason why, and narcissists, how they triangulate and the reason why they do.
And then what do I evoke in you? What I evoke in you is no, baby, I'll be around forever. Like, I love you forever. Oh my God, you're the one for me. And then the fear of abandonment goes away, right? That's great. You fixed the problem. It's beautiful. And now, though, something subtle has happened. So now you start to bear the emotional burden of their roller coaster. You're not only managing your own roller coaster, now they have made you responsible for their roller coaster. And you've been a willing recipient. And so then what happens is they'll start to push you away, right? They'll say it the first time. You're like, yeah, baby, I love you forever, babe. And then a week goes by and they're like, oh yeah, you're going to break up with me. I'm like, no, I won't. And then a month later, they're saying it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And it can manifest in other ways too. But they start to push you away, start to do things that kind of piss you off. They start to pick fights. And then you're like, fine, you want me to leave? I'll leave. And so you get fed up and you walk the door. Now all of their fears have become true. And so then what they do is they activate a completely different circuit. which is reeling you in. So now that they are actually being abandoned, there's the fear of abandonment, and then there's the actual abandonment. And when they start to become abandoned, they activate a whole other set of survival mechanisms to pull you back because, oh my God, now it's happening. The sky is falling. Everything is falling apart. Engage emergency techniques.
And sometimes it doesn't happen that fast. When I've been with borderlines, they've split, and they can split for a while sometimes. It's not going to be instantly they employ this comeback stuff. It can be weeks to months later. And it also depends if they have someone else there too. If they have another source of supply, if they have another like favorite person, then they might just move on to the next person too. That can also happen. So again, it just depends on the specific situation.
DEFCON 5. And so now they completely changed their tune. I'm so sorry. Will you ever forgive me? I'm such a piece of crap. I can't believe I did this to you. You deserve so much better than me. Please tell me anything, anything, anything. I'll do anything. I'll do anything to bring you back. And by the way, my life has been so hard and you're so perfect and I love you so much, right? And this is when we get into a third thing that kind of happens. We'll table that for a second. So then what happens is they engage in all of these behaviors. They'll go full speed ahead on whatever they can do to bring you back. Anything you want, anything you want, anything you want. Just come back, just come back, just come back. And so they say, I've changed. Babe, I've changed. I'll do anything for you. And then you come back. And now you're here again, right? So all of those survival mechanisms disappear. All of those reeling you in mechanisms disappear. And now the fear that you're going to abandon them again happens again. And then they start pushing you away, pushing you away, pushing you away.
And that's not necessarily that. I think it can also be this fear of being smothered and the fear of losing themselves. That's initially why they'll push you away, because they'll feel smothered. And it's like too much for them. They don't want to lose themselves. They feel engulfed. Then they'll push away. But then when they push away, then they actually get that fear of abandonment once you're away. So I think that's another way that it can happen.
And so this cycle repeats over and over and over again, and people get fed up with it and they're done. Like, honestly, like I was talking to one of my patients a couple of years ago who's a gamer, and they were saying, like, you know what this feels like? It feels like I'm in a game of Mortal Kombat and I'm fighting against Scorpion. And Scorpion's like, get over here, jerks me in, and then uppercuts me all the way back across the screen. And as soon as I'm over there, it's get over here again, and then jerking me back. And so you're getting jerked this way and jerked back that way. And it's like, it's too much to handle. So the third thing that we're going to talk about, which kind of relates to this, right? So once you've gone away, they're like, I'll do anything. You're perfect. Please, please, please. The third thing that people with BPD do is something called splitting. So splitting is when you take, remember, it's not the bell curve. So most people are.
And also to note, not all borderlines are exactly the same. According to Christine Ann Lawson, there are 4 types of borderline mothers: the queen, the waif, the hermit, and the witch. And they can all have different presentations slightly. Now, those 4 are not in the DSM in any way. She invented them to kind of try to articulate how they act. So not every borderline is going to be exactly the same. And when you diagnose borderline based on the traits, that's not even necessarily the best way to diagnose it, in my opinion. The same way I don't think the DSM is the best way to diagnose NPD, because I think the narcissistic operating system is what's important. The same I think of borderline. It's the borderline operating system that's truly more important. And this is also the reason why they say 50 to 60% of people with one cluster B disorder can qualify for another. Yeah, that's true when you diagnose based on behavioral traits. That's a little bit different than the operating system. But let's hear what he says about splitting.
Aren't normal. They take that and they shove people to the sides. So they idealize some people and they demonize other people. This can cause real problems in treatment situations, especially like inpatient situations, where they'll idealize the doctor and they'll demonize the nurse. They'll treat the nurse like absolute crap. The nurse hates me. The nurse is pathetic. I dislike the nurse. And oh my God, the doctor is amazing. The doctor has cured my trauma. Like, you're the best doctor I've ever seen. And oh my God, I just wish the nurses were a little bit more like you. And then as a doctor, you're like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, well, they're so cruel to me. And what they'll try to do is they'll split. So they'll idealize some people, they'll demonize other people, and they can create conflict because now the doctors are getting mad at the nurses, right? Because the doctors are like, oh my God, the patients with BPD are like, you're so amazing. You're so Awesome. And then you go and you're like, hey, we need to talk about this patient and the way that y'all are treating them. It's really inappropriate the way that y'all are not behaving with compassion. And then they create conflict. What does that idealization look like in the relationship? And now we got to pause for a second, right? Because when you date people with BPD, or when you see these like crazy ex-girlfriends on like TV shows and stuff, or crazy ex-boyfriends, you got to ask yourself, like, and everyone asks themselves, right? Why on earth are we dating these people, right? Like, why would you ever date a crazy chick or a crazy dude? And your family members and your friends are like, why on earth are you in this relationship? Like, I don't get it. It seems so toxic. It's such a roller coaster. And that's because they do not understand what it's like to be idealized. Because for this person, oh my God, if you have any iota of insecurity yourself, dating someone with BPD is the best thing in the universe. This is why people with BPD always end up with narcissists, by the way.
And a couple things about this. One, part of it's a trauma bond too. People can develop trauma bonds with borderlines for sure. And also as a guy, some borderline women, they do really know how to make a guy feel like $1 million. They do really do that sometimes. So to an extent, I agree with what he's saying here.
Always, but many times statistically, there's a correlation there. Because what happens is they idealize you. They're like, oh my God, for those 72 hours, you're so amazing. All my previous boyfriends have been so terrible. I've been abused so much. I'm so hurt. I was thinking about killing myself. Suicidality is very common. But every time I talk to you, it makes it go away. And oh my God, I was so hurt and everyone is terrible and I'm suicidal. But the moment that I get that penis, everything gets better. You make it all go away. A lifelong of trauma just with your dick is just gone. And if you are a dude, holy crap, that is so addicting. And what does that look like for the women who are dating men with BPD? They're good looking, they're intelligent, they're funny, they're engaged with you. And oh my God, they have the sensitive side. Oh my God, they like cried in your arms and y'all made love and like until the sun came up and they confessed their trauma to you. And they're like, I was going to kill myself until I met you. And you found this perfect human being, this damaged, this broken, this traumatized, but oh my.
And that's another thing. If you hear someone say to you, I was going to kill myself if not for you until you came around, not a good sign. Not a good sign at all. Because that also means that their happiness is based on you. And if you leave, what then? Then you're going to get some emotional blackmail. They might threaten to end their own life. Not a good thing.
God, you can fix him. You can fix him. They idealize you. Holy crap, is it addictive? And then they demonize you. And what's so addictive about that is like, oh my God, this relationship is so good 50% of the time. And the other 50% of the time, it's such a mess. And so if you're dating someone in this situation, you're like, how do I move things in the right direction? Because if we can go to 55%, 60, 75, 80, 90, like then this relationship is working. I can make it work.
And that's the thing. If that's how they are, and they're not in treatment in any way, they're not doing anything about it, it is going to stay that way. And you can't have both. You can't have the good without the bad. You're not going to have those intense highs without also those intense lows. And thinking that you can just pull the intense highs out and leave out the bad stuff, that's delusion. That's just not going to happen. People think this way with narcissists too. They'll think, oh, I had some good days or maybe even good weeks, but then the bad days always come back. And the thing is, you can't separate them. They are inseparable because if they have that disorder, they bring that disorder wherever they go. And so you can't confuse some good days or weeks with a good relationship. You got to take the good with the bad with them if you're going to be there.
Because what do they say the second that you're like, I'm done with this. This is too much. This is too crazy. All my friends say you're crazy. They're like, I'll change, baby. I'll change for you. Please give me the D. That's all I need. Right. And they're like, okay, fine. And that's what happens. Right. And so what people don't appreciate is that, like, sure, you think people are stupid for dating the crazy person, but there's a damn good reason that you're dating that person. That's what they don't see. And this is where if you look at human behavior, it's the random reinforcement schedule, which is like if you look at like slots and stuff and gambling, right? It's like being perfect 50% of the time and being crap 50% of the time is more likely to engage you than being like mediocre all the time. And so this idealization, demonization aspect is really hard to deal with, because on one day you're God's gift to this person and you fix everything in their life. And on the other day, they get angry with you because you're starting to pull away with them and they treat you like absolute crap. Okay. So this idealization is really important to understand. The next thing that we're going to touch on, so this is kind of an interesting aspect, is when we talked a little bit about, they don't have a strong internal sense of self. What that can sometimes look like is people with BPD are really good at playing chameleon. And remember that their own emotional state is kind of like a mirror of what you feel. So if you're angry, they're angry. Or if, and one way that can.
I don't think it's so cut and dry as that. He likes to say that. He said the same thing about the narcissistic parents, right? Oh, you determine how they feel. Not necessarily. It's not that cut and dry, in my opinion. They can be feeling things irrelevant to you. There can be other things going on. Not that cut and dry.
Look, and this can be kind of confusing for people, is that they will adopt the mannerisms and interests of people around you. So sometimes you'll meet someone and it's like, wow, I'm into underwater basket weaving. And this person is like super into underwater basket weaving. I'm into anime. They're into anime. Like, oh my God, I found a dude who like loves to like cook. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's pretty cool. Right. So I found a dude who loves to like organize things in glass jars in the pantry. Like, that's wild. And so some of the things that can be really confusing is when you first meet this person, they can start to become a little bit of a chameleon.
And this part is true. They will start taking on the identity of the people they're around. So if it's a borderline woman, she starts dating a guy that's into sports. All of a sudden, she really likes sports and she likes all the same sports that he does. Then she dates a guy that likes country music. Then all of a sudden, you'll see her wearing some cowboy boots and a hat and going to the country concerts. Or she dates a dude that's into freaking being a DJ. Then all of a sudden, she's like a rave chick. So they just kind of bend. They'll bend and they'll shift their identities to match whoever they're with.
And kind of like shape themselves to your interests. And then the problem is that as the relationship goes on, like that's not a genuine interest on their part. They were just kind of not really pretending, but they were absorbing a piece of your identity is really a better way to put it. And then like it becomes kind of frustrating because you kind of feel like a little bit led on. You feel a little bit deceived. I don't think the deception is intentional. It's just people with BPD are a little bit like a mirror where they like what you see in them is what they see, right? So they start to become a little bit of reflection. Now, if you're listening to this, and maybe you're a friend or family member has said like, oh my God, like, why would you date this person? Like I may be painting a really bad picture of, oh my God, clearly you got to run for the hills, right? But no, actually you don't need to run for the hills. Like whether you run for the hills or not is ultimately like your choice. And you have to really think about whether don't feel guilty either way, but I don't want you to leave them because they have BPD. But I don't want you to stay with them because out of guilt. My hope is to educate you. And if you decide, hey, I really want to try to build a relationship with this person, I want to try to help y'all understand this as best as you can. Okay.
So before he even goes into this, I'll reiterate what I think. What I think is it all depends on how they're acting. If they have managed BPD and they've done those 5 steps of change, they're in treatment and they're improving, that would be a different story. But if you don't see that, you don't see them trying, you don't see them putting in the footwork, and even worse, you see them playing the victim or blaming others, then I would say nothing's going to change. And why would you want to stay in a situation like that? Do you want to rescue someone? Do you think, well, I don't want to give up on this person? Do you catch yourself daring, defending, excusing, explaining, or rationalizing their behavior? Those are all not good signs, I would say. So you really have to be honest with yourself why you'd want to stay in a situation like this. And especially if they're disrespecting you and abusing you or mistreating you. And yes, borderlines can do that too. Why would you want to stay? That's what I would say. Why would you want to?
Okay, so how do you succeed in a situation like this? So the first thing is don't give up, okay? So like I shared at the very beginning, BPD is something that for the vast majority of people enters remission. And a stable relationship is something that can be really, really impactful and positive towards that. And the other aspect of don't give up is remember it's a roller coaster. So what that sort of means is that even if things feel really, really, really awful, if you can kind of be neutral for long enough, the awful periods will disappear. And even if things feel really, really...
That's not good. That's not a good suggestion. They will not always just disappear. Because again, that study he's citing from is not exactly correct. He's leaving out the big part of there will be unstable. like their relationships will still not be good. He didn't mention that part of the study. So don't hold on to hope thinking, well, in time they'll just be better. No. What you have to think is if they don't put any footwork into change and they don't try anything different, nothing's going to change. That's the right way to see it, because anything else is hoping for a miracle. Anything else is hoping for magic. You can't hope for magic.
Really, really amazing, that'll kind of like normalize too. So in a bizarre way, what the main reason that I would say don't give up on people who have BPD is because time is actually on your side. Things will naturally return to an equilibrium. So
you don't give up on them because they have BPD. You would give up on them because their behaviors are no good. You would give up on them because they're disrespecting you, they're abusing you, they're mistreating you, and they're not doing the work. That's why you would give up. It's not because they have BPD. It's because they're not trying and they're not doing the work and their actions don't match their words. That's why you would give up.
like, you don't have to react to a particular thing, which is the core of the problem, right? Is they have all of these behaviors and we end up reacting to them. And then as we react to their behaviors, we evoke a whole different set of behaviors, a la Scorpion. And then we end up reacting to those. So we're sort of it feels like we're being like yo-yoed back and forth in this relationship. So as best as you can, try not to give up and remember that things will return to equilibrium. So the second thing that I would strongly...
What I don't understand is why is he even saying try not to give up? I don't think that's a good suggestion.
We strongly recommend is that you do your best to set boundaries with compassion. So this is actually really hard, but like people with BPD will interpret meaning in actions that you have that is not what you meant. So for example, let's say I'm dating someone with BPD, they'll text me and I don't answer their text because I'm at work. They will feel the reason I'm not texting them is because I don't like them or I don't love them or I've met someone else. These are the kinds of thoughts that go through their head. And I know this because I've had tons of patients with BPD. And so what I do as a psychiatrist is try to help them understand that, okay, like you can have that emotional reaction, but the way you're reading the situation isn't necessarily. And so what we try to do.
And that's a good thing there to know. We have to pay attention to the stories that we tell ourselves about things. And this goes for any of us, whether we have borderline or not. But okay, someone doesn't reply to a text. What's the story you tell yourself? Oh, they were just busy. It's not that they don't like me anymore. Or is the story you tell yourself, oh, they must hate me now. They're losing interest. They're going to leave me. And it's the same thing about a story we tell ourselves if we get rejected. Okay, someone gets rejected. One person tells themselves the story, oh, I'm worthless. I'm worthless. I'm no good. This person rejected me. Another person tells themselves the story, well, every no is one step closer to a yes. That person just wasn't a good match for me. It's their loss, not mine. The same event has triggered two different stories for those people to tell themselves. We have to pay attention to the stories that we tell ourselves.
Is we try to set boundaries with them. Hey, I may not be able to text you at work, but you don't want to do it in an emotionally reactive way, and you want to try to do it as compassionately as possible. And the whole problem in relationships with BPD is that when we set boundaries, there's a lot of negative emotion associated with it. I don't know why you constantly text me. What do you expect? I can't text you all hours of the day. I have a life. And ooh, that is the worst thing to say, because now you have a life and you have a life outside of them. And that evokes the fear of abandonment. It's happening again. And so it's this whole cycle and mess. So
he's basically telling them to like tiptoe around their big emotional reactions. And that's not necessarily a good suggestion, in my opinion. But let's hear what his suggestion is.
What you want to do is set boundaries, but set it with compassion. Hey, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to answer your text. The truth of the matter is sometimes when I'm at work, I can't afford to be distracted. I'm sorry that hurts you. I recognize that hurts you. I'm going to think long and hard about what I can do about that. I do really care about you, but there are some things that, I can't do for you. And that boundary setting can also be in relation to like emotional regulation.
Okay, so he's more talking about the tone. So in the tone and how he said it in the first one, yeah, that wouldn't be a good tone to have. The second tone, if you're going to have boundaries with anyone, setting them compassionately is probably the best way to have someone truly listen to you and be most likely to respect you and listen to them. That's what I would say about that. Now, again, though, I'd be careful about ever tiptoeing around people's big emotions. That's something that you got to be careful with that. That's usually not a good sign.
But this is another key thing that we really have to do is you have to start weaning yourself off being the source of their emotional regulation. I'm not saying that you can't emotionally support them, but as long as their method to manage their own emotions is you're going to burn out. So this is where I would strongly encourage that you encourage them, and maybe even with them, start to develop alternate emotional regulation skills. A great way to manage their emotions outside of your relationship is actually therapy. This is one of the times where I'm not going to say sign them up for coaching. You should see a trained therapist because we're talking about a diagnosis, okay? You can also do things like meditation, mindfulness. There are all sorts of other emotional regulation techniques like yoga and things like that. But you're going to have to start to, in order for this relationship to survive, there must be effort put into emotional regulation that does not rely on you, okay? So that's really critical.
Now, again, don't become their therapist either, though. It's up to them to go get therapy on their own. And some of his suggestions here, it kind of borders on almost enmeshment, like trying to do more for them than they're willing to do for themselves. That's not necessarily a good sign. Like, they have to be doing this on their own. And that's the time when, if someone has BPD, if you have seen them do the work and they've done the work on themselves, that's someone that would be more trustworthy to me because they've done it on their own. But if someone's only doing something because of me and I'm like holding their hand to do it, I don't think that's as good at all.
The next thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit weird, but this is don't overreact to the highs. The biggest mistake that I see a lot of people who have relationships with BPD make is that they hate the lows. So we're totally fine getting rid of the lows, but we don't want to get rid of the highs, right? Like, dude, when a woman tells me that the only thing in life that will fix all the trauma is my dick, that's really addictive, right? Because we're men and like
he loves saying the word dick and penis. It seems like he says it a lot.
Our self-esteem is based on the performance of our penis or sinus of our penis or whatever. And especially if I have a average size penis or less than average size penis, like that's going to mean so much to me. So one of the key things that I found working with people with BPD and people who are dating BPD is that you can't give in to the highs as well. So you need tranquility from the highs and the lows. So if there's something super amazing that you all are about to engage in, you need the same amount of restraint, which is something that in society we never talk about, right? We're all for getting rid of the lows, but no one's like, hey, by the way, you should temper your highs. You should not lean into the best parts of your relationship. What? That's insane. But the key thing in BPD is that we don't want to be reactive, right? We don't want to follow the yo-yo when it's on its up. We don't want to ride the roller coaster all the way up, because as soon as we go all the way up, there's going to be a plunge. Right? So we want to stay as neutral as possible. The next thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is encouraging the dialectic. So this is super cool, but there's one of the best evidence-based treatments for borderline personality disorder is something called dialectical behavioral therapy. And this is it's basically cognitive behavioral therapy with some amount of mindfulness and Eastern concepts mixed in. And the way that the therapy was developed is actually super cool too, because there was actually a psychologist who had BPD herself, and she's been pretty open about this. And her experience was that, therapy didn't offer quite enough. And so then she got into mindfulness, and she discovered like one key concept from Eastern thinking, which in Sanskrit is Advaita Vedanta, which then she found like, okay, this is what's missing from therapy. And the cool thing is that this is not an aspect of therapy. This is actually an aspect of Advaita Vedanta and the meditative traditions. And everyone should be learning this kind of stuff. So what does it mean to encourage the dialectic? So remember that people with BPD have very black and white thinking, right? They split. So either you are an angel or you are a demon. There's nothing in between. And so in the experience of people with BPD is often that if you are mad at me, that means you hate me. If you are mad at me, that means you don't love me. So they tie everything together. They cannot sit with the idea that someone is angry with me and loves me at the same time. So literally the therapy that we try to engage in.
And what he's talking about there is a lack of object constancy. So When they're mad at somebody, they can no longer see the part of them that they once really cared about. So that's what happens, and it goes from black to white. They call that a lack of object permanence or object constancy.
Is to teach people that, hey, someone can be mad at you and love you at the same time. That someone can treat you really well and not love you at the same time. Because the sad truth is that oftentimes people with BPD will wind up in abusive relationships with narcissists. And those people will treat them well sometimes, but actually not really be invested in them or will take advantage of them. So one of the key things that you can do in the relationship is encourage the dialectic and even ask questions like, hey, if we're having a fight right now, what do you think about whether I love you or not? If we're fighting, does that mean that I can love you at the same time, or does that mean that I don't love you? And that's where you can have like a calm conversation, hopefully, and you can work at it that, hey, just because I'm mad doesn't mean that I don't love you. Just because I don't text you doesn't mean that I dislike you. Just because you keep on asking me whether I find other women attractive and I one time say yes, doesn't mean that I'm going to leave you. Right? There are all kinds of things, and encourage that dialectic where both things, two conflicting things, can be simultaneously true. I can be frustrated with you and love you. I can be busy and care about you. I can be mad at you and have compassion towards you. So that dialectic becomes really important. The last thing, and this is also really important, is to stay stable yourself. So I strongly recommend that if you are in a relationship and you really want to make it work, which I think is worthwhile, right? That's why we're making this video. This is a video about don't run for the hills, because that's what our media tells us. Our media.
And again, so he makes a good point about the few things he said before. You can't bank on only the good times being there. You got to take the good with the bad. More than one thing can be true at the same time, right? You can be angry at somebody and still care about them. But in terms of this here, you don't run for the hills only if they're doing the work, only if they're really trying. If they're not, there is no shame in getting out of there. So again, I'd be really, really cautious about someone that wants to stay. But again, so here's a situation that could happen. Someone doesn't know they're with someone that has borderline, and the borderline themselves doesn't know. They're together for a few years. Maybe they're married now. Now, okay, what do you do now? Maybe there's a couple kids involved. What do you do? In a situation like that, okay, I can understand trying harder to make it work than if it was just some kind of dating relationship. Sure. But again, you're going to want to see that person do the work, because if they don't do the work, you're setting yourself up for a miserable existence at that point. And unfortunately, this magical thinking of, oh, it's just going to go away in 10 years, I would not count on that.
Media tells us, hey, if you've got a crazy ex, leave, right? And the internet tells you, hey, if she's crazy, leave. Tells you, hey, he's crazy, leave. That's what everyone is telling us to do. Your family, your friends. But the truth of the matter is that people with borderline personality disorder are human beings and are just as deserving of healthy relationships and love and stability as anyone else. The unfortunate thing is chances are they were traumatized at some point in their life, which makes it harder for them to successfully do that.
Sometimes. Many were, but it neglects the genetic aspect.
They have so many adaptations and survival mechanisms and maladaptations that dating them can be really hard. And so as you ride that roller coaster, try to stay stable yourself. So what does that mean? That means sometimes seeing a therapist yourself. Once again, goes kind of beyond coaching. If your problem is like, hey, I have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, or I'm trying to figure out what to do with my career, or like, whatever. If you want to learn how to meditate, get Dr. K's guide, whatever. But if you're in a relationship with someone with BPD, I'd strongly recommend that you actually see a therapist.
And here's the other thing about it. When you're trying to really help someone else, you have to make sure you don't drown yourself. And this happens all of the time when people are trying to help someone with BPD. The BPD person doesn't get better. And not only do they not get better, they pull you down with them. This happens so often. And in fact, it is more likely to happen. It's just like the person that is trying to help someone with an addiction. Only the person with an addiction can try to help themselves. If they don't want help, nothing's going to change. And not only that, they're going to pull the quality of your life down with them. So it puts you in a bad spot.
do everything that you can to stay stable yourself. Because remember, their sense of self relates to who you are, right? They become a mirror. So the key thing, and this is how relationships help people with BPD, is that the more stable you are, the more stable they will become. So don't give up on them, because they're
I don't like that suggestion either, because that's like outsourcing the responsibility onto the other person, where the more stable you are, the more stable they will be. It's setting up the person who's in a relationship with someone who has borderline to blame themselves for the other person's issue. And that's just not how it goes. Everyone needs to take responsibility for themselves. You can't blame yourself for the other person's condition. Now, how do I square that with the positive masculine containment piece? I would say that takes social calibration to know, okay, which aspect of it is the woman not feeling safe and loved, and which aspect of it truly is disordered. I don't expect younger men to understand the difference, but as you get older, hopefully you'll be able to know the difference. You understand more things. But let's face it, not everyone's super into psychology like me. Not everyone's in this space like me. So I can't expect a lot of men to be able to understand that difference, especially if they're not in this field. They're not learning about this stuff. So it's tough. It's a tough one.
wonderful, beautiful human beings. And don't fall for the highs or the lows. Good luck. You're going to need it. So one last kind of like quick disclaimer. So a lot of the stuff in this video has been kind of like hyperbolic. And I want to share with y'all that the actual experience of people with BPD in a lot of these examples are like widely variable, right? So part of the challenge,
I'm glad he's mentioning this,
of trying to educate people on the internet is that I try to say things that will resonate and connect with people. But at the same time, I could be playing into and exacerbating stereotypes. So from the bottom of my heart, if I've offended anyone, I'm really sorry. I try to be entertaining and educational, but I want all y'all to understand that what we were talking about today was sort of hyperbolic, and there's actually a lot of variability with the way that people with BPD will present and manifest.
Okay. So I'm glad he gave that addendum there at the end, because like I said earlier, it can present in different ways. They're not all going to be the same. But notice what he didn't ever mention. He didn't ever mention the borderlines being abusive in any way. That happens. That absolutely happens. Didn't mention much about the disrespect. He kind of framed it more as an emotional roller coaster, which it also is, but I don't think it's the total picture. But as for the announcements I was going to go over, I interviewed Dr. Carey today. We talked a lot about autism, narcissism, predators, a lot of good stuff, really. That's one that Jolly would like. She would like that because she's on the spectrum like us, like Dr. Carey and I. And that's what we went over today. But Ellie, now that I'm here again, what was going on with you? You're having problems with one of your narcissistic siblings? So what she says, what I needed was real, true, skilled help then for abandonment trauma. Yeah, that's what anyone with borderline needs. They need to get to some DBT. They need to do some brain spotting or EFT. And they have to go to a professional. And they, one, have to admit they have a problem. Two, get honest about it. Three, do something about it. Be willing. Put in that footwork. And then keep trying. Because sometimes they give up. So some borderlines, they'll do those four. But then when it comes to the resilience, then they jump ship. And they say, nope, screw this. This is too hard. Or they get too close to something that would actually really help them. And they'll have a fear of success. And what's a fear of success? A fear of success is really times a fear of responsibility a lot of times. Or they'll have some imposter syndrome and they'll think, well, I'm not worthy of this, so I'm going to self-sabotage. You'll often see borderline women, they'll self-sabotage with dudes that they think they don't deserve. So it's a good dude, not abusive, like truly a good dude, not like the quote unquote nice guy that's manipulative, but a truly good dude. The borderline woman a lot of times will try to self-sabotage it. Sometimes she'll do that to see how much he cares, but oftentimes she'll do it because she doesn't think she deserves it. And she would rather be with a narcissistic guy because that guy treats her the way she thinks she deserves to be treated. And it matches how she feels about herself on the inside. That's a cold, hard truth, but it also happens. Right? Is it every borderline woman? No. But that also, it does happen. Very tragic and scary. Which aspect, Ellie? Can you describe imposter syndrome? So basically, imposter syndrome is when you don't think you deserve the success you have. Like wherever you are in life, you think that I don't deserve this. I'm an imposter. I'm a fraud. And then people who have that often will self-sabotage. But again, it's just about having your realities match. If your external world doesn't match your internal world, that can make people scared. And they'll have that imposter syndrome sometimes. But again, I would say if you're there, your external world, is this, then match your internal state with that. Don't try to self-sabotage to make your external world match your internal world. Do it the other way around. So you know what? I did this. I have this job, or I have this relationship that's good. Let me own it. Maybe I did deserve this. Maybe I did. And why don't I deserve good things? Why don't I deserve to be happy? Why don't I deserve financial success? And I say that like it's easy to do this. No, it's not easy to do it. But there are ways to try to improve it. What is happening with Sib scares me, to say the least. Well, is this the one with schizophrenia? Watch that 2 years ago video. Great stop and review at important times. You are amazing, Jared, calling how it is. What video were you watching, Sonny? I appreciate the kind words. There's so many videos there, I don't remember them all anymore. I used to talk about borderline a lot more back in the day, because I used to talk about my experience dating borderline women. Congrats, we're pregnant. There you go. Oh, they feel the life is unreal. Well, are you talking about the schizophrenic person or the person with imposter syndrome, Ellie? Oh, okay. Good. Okay. We can do that, Ellie, too. We can do that too, especially if you think there's some danger involved. That is important for sure. But for Sonny, I'll say this too. It's easier for me to go live now than it is to do recorded videos. And it's also easier for me to have a conversation with somebody. I think that's more interesting for me as well, as opposed to doing a 10 to 15 minute recorded video. So for some reason, I don't have that problem with live streams. I can do that. Sometimes I can break down another video, or I can just spitball for a while. Wizards are never late nor early, Phil Bradley. Never. And so Jamie says, I don't think BPDers get obsessed with strangers. Usually not. It's really, when he says they care about what others think, I think what he really means is only their favorite person, or only someone that they really care about. They're not going to care about the strangers as much, but their favorite person, oh yeah, they'll care about that. But that doesn't prevent them from doing what they do. They'll still do the emotional roller coaster. They'll still split. So I don't like his framing of how you feel about them as how they'll feel about themselves, or how you treat them as how they'll feel about themselves. Kind of. I just don't think it's that cut and dry. But again, so Dr. Carey, I interviewed her today. I will be uploading that tomorrow. Josh Connolly, for those of you who know him, he was on Mark Vicente's a few weeks ago to months ago, probably months ago. I'll be talking to him on Thursday. Maybe we'll break down some of his conversation with Mark Vicente before I talk to him on Thursday, if you're all interested in that. Where's George, by the way? Where's George and Jolly and Rhodes and Bear and Old Bear and who else? There's others I'm forgetting, no doubt. Cat. Oh boy. Yeah, but Ellie, if you want to do that, we can definitely do that too. But anyway, that's really all I had here for today. I wanted to go over that borderline video of Dr. K. And granted also, I'm a little hard. I'm probably hard on Dr. K. I don't not like Dr. K. I disagree with him on some things. I think part of what it is for him is he said it at the end. He's trying to make this entertaining. He's more of like an entertaining psychiatrist at this point. And when you're doing that, you're not necessarily going to be as nuanced maybe as you could be. And maybe you miss, I don't know, you become a little more black and white with things when the reality is a little bit different. So that's what I would say about that. Again, but I don't disagree with everything he says. He says a lot of good things too. I just try to pull some areas of some possible disagreement here for an interesting discussion, for an entertaining, interesting, and educational breakdown. That's all. They are probably resting from the holidays. Who's that? Oh, yes, those people I mentioned. Yeah, they probably are. They probably are, but we're going to have a busy month of content for you, Ellie. We got some exciting interviews coming up. I got to line them up more. You'll keep on seeing the shorts and all that good stuff. Good for you critiquing all talking heads on YouTube. Thanks. It's important because some of them get pedestalized, if you ask me. People will take their, like any big creator, they're going to have a group of people that basically worship them and say, yep, these people are great. Everything they say is right. What they believe is what I believe. And I would say in the social sciences in particular, there's many different viewpoints. Don't ever let somebody tell you that, no, this one way is the right way. In some cases, I think that can be true. But in many other cases, especially the nature versus nurture thing, no, not at all. Not at all. There's differing views. There's differing theories. And I try to listen to them all. I try not to blindly believe any, but I certainly get skeptical when people start saying to me, nope, definitely wrong. Definitely this. It's like, how do we know? How do we know? He might water it down for entertainment purposes. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that going on. I think if he were to be strict by the book, maybe not as entertaining anymore. But what I do is I try to go off of my experience with it too. I've dated borderlines, so I know what it looks like in real life versus just what it is in a textbook, just in what he sees in his office. And again, what he sees in his office might not always be the truth either. Anyone that goes to therapy, that therapist, they only know what they're told. And what they're told is not always the truth. Sometimes there can be lies of omission. Sometimes there can be half-truths. Sometimes there can be outright lies. And who is more likely to do that? Cluster B people, without a doubt. So, and that part is not his fault per se. He can only help to the extent that he's hearing the truth. That goes for all of us. We can't help anyone if they're not going to be honest with us, right? So that's a part of it. And a good therapist, a good coach, a good wizard, they're going to try to find ways to get to the truth. That part's true as well. But again, it still comes down to them giving us the truth because we can only work with what we've got. So he hears what borderlines are telling him in sessions. And it might be sometimes a distorted view, perhaps. It's not exactly how it is. They're saying it in a charitable way for themselves to make it look a certain way. That's certainly a possibility. Is it every time? No, nothing's going to be every time for the most part, but that could be happening. Psychology can be very dry and somewhat boring. It can, the really nitty gritty science of it. I'm not as good at that. Dr. Salerno is better at that. Some other people are better at that. Dr. Eatonson's better at that from his perspective. Sam Vaknin. Who else? Just the people that really get into the literature. They get into the theories, the literature, the peer-reviewed studies, evidence. That can be dry. But I have a a cynical view in a way on some of that, because in social sciences in particular, there's a replica crisis in the studies, meaning 50% of them can't get replicated. It might even be more than that now. So again, how good is a study if the results can't be replicated? Another one, observing a process changes a process, and anything that relies on self-reports, I'm very skeptical about that too. What are my preferred time for consultations? Afternoons and evenings, Eastern Standard Time. That's my preferred. Because I'm a night owl. So I do them in the morning too, but if I had my preference, it would be afternoons and evenings, Eastern Standard Time. That's true, Sonny. That's true. So the brain scans that show impaired empathy in the parts of the brain, less gray matter in the parts of the brain responsible for empathy. Yeah, there's no lying there. And that can be pretty predictable via birth. Now, Dr. Simon and I were talking about that, where we don't necessarily know when those brains changed. He goes, we don't know for sure. But when I was talking to Dr. Salerno about it, he said, no, there's a pretty high likelihood that that's how they were born. So Dr. Simon was being a little more cautious, but they can predict pretty accurately which brains are going to be like that. So I agree with you, Sonny. I'm glad you brought that up. But all right, everybody, I'm going to rock and roll for now. A little bit of a shorter stream. Kristen John mentioned that viral clip of him describing BPD on your last podcast with him. Have you seen that specific clip? It was interesting, his framing. No, I have not seen it, and he didn't really tell me too much about it when I asked him. But could you tell me real quick what he said in it? Because I've never seen it. He said other people were using it on TikTok, just his voice, but I've never seen that clip. But I remember what he was saying was it was making borderlines cry good tears to hear about themselves. And what did you think about it? Yeah, you can definitely send it. Yeah, because I want to see what he says. I want to see what he says about it. I'll be curious if it is him telling more of a charitable view or if it's like definitely accurate. I don't know. And then Christian John, might be around time for him to come back around on the show too at some point. Although I've already interviewed him twice in the last couple months, but maybe 2026. That seems like a good time to talk to him again. Yeah, but to thrive, I'll be looking for that. I want to watch that. You got it, Ellie. And you got it, Sonny. And Danielle is already gone. And Phil Bradley. Till next time, my man. Till next time. mellowmentoring@gmail.com is where you can send that. Or on Instagram or wherever you are. Yeah, do that. Yeah, Instagram is better. Yeah. You see me on Instagram, so. All right, everybody. Over and out.